So if you don't understand the business and you don't know the business, how can you make sure you're enabling the business? Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this week's edition of Life of a CISO with yours truly, Dr. Eric Cole. It's always a pleasure to spend some time with you and to talk about my favorite topic. I sort of joke that I need to change this title from Life of a CISO to being a world-class CISO, because that's really the name of the game here, right? We're not about average. We're not about status quo. We're about taking it to the next level and beyond, right? So all about world-class, and love spending some time with you. What I want to talk about today is really sort of what are the things that a CISO should be thinking about? What are the key questions that a CISO needs to ask and understand? Because if you follow me for a while, you know I'm a big fan of asking questions. Let's not assume we know everything. Let's not assume we have all the answers. Let's always understand the other person's position and where they're coming from, so then we can make sure that we're giving them information that they need that can help them do their job. So the first question I have is, how does your organization view cybersecurity? So if I went to your company, whether you are a CISO, you want to be a CISO, or you're trying to become a CISO at a new organization, whatever that entity is, if I walked around and asked people, what do you think of when you think of cybersecurity? What's the definition of cybersecurity? What's the current approach your organization takes to cybersecurity? My question is, what would the answers be? And here's the real question. What is the correct answer to that? Right? So when I do this and I walk around a lot of organizations, what I'll usually hear when I ask people about the importance of cybersecurity or how does cybersecurity fit in the business, yeah, cybersecurity is important. Well, okay, so how does that impact your job? What's the role that you play in cybersecurity? Well, you know, I do the stuff. Right? Or I follow the policies or procedures. You should talk to the cybersecurity folks. They just sort of tell us what to do, and we sort of do that. And you sort of get this little bit of runaround where people sort of know the correct answer, but they aren't really doing it, right? That they know they have to say that, yeah, cybersecurity is important, but in reality, they're thinking, I don't care. As long as I'm doing my job, I get paid and life is easy. I'm not really worried about it. All right. So we want to go in and start changing that. Remember, every individual, every company is a target, and cybersecurity is every person's responsibility. It's not the individual. And this is where you get a lot of differences. I myself have done comparisons, like most, between IT and cybersecurity. But the more I delve into it from a strategic mindset, from a world-class CISO standpoint, I start realizing just how different they really are. For the most part, IT is really a technical problem. Now, yes, you need a budget and you need staff, but the day-to-day running of an IT department is really more technical focused. Making sure you have redundancy, failover systems are up and running. And you give the tech to the individual, and as long as they utilize that tech, they don't really have to be actively involved in IT. They don't really have to do a whole lot, right? For them to check their email, for them to open up Word, for them to access a document in the cloud, work on it and save it back. There's really not a whole lot they need to do to help IT accomplish that. So IT is really technical focused. They give it to the user utilizes. There's not really a lot of involvement they have to have within that. On the other hand, when you look at cybersecurity, it's a strategic problem. It's really a business focused problem. It's not just technology. And if you don't believe me, How many companies that have been breached that you know of that have had a lot of tech? All of them, right? This is not like 20 years ago, right? Today, if you look at any organization that has had a cybersecurity breach, I can guarantee they have spent money on cybersecurity. They have technology. It's running. It's in place. I don't know of any organizations, and I know a lot of organizations, right? I don't know of any of them that don't have any cybersecurity tech or any cybersecurity in place at all within the business. Yet, they still get compromised. They still get broken into. So it's a strategic business problem. Second, you can have the best tech in the world. And unless you stop functionality completely, if you're allowing functionality, the user plays a role in cybersecurity. There are going to be emails that make it to the individual's inbox that are potentially malicious. There are going to be websites that that person could potentially go to that could have drive-by downloads. There's going to be phone calls or people that they interact with that are malicious and trying to gain access, gain passwords, or gain information to the systems. So ultimately, when you look at it, to have a secure organization that's protected and locked down, it requires an involvement of everyone in the organization. And that's why people struggle with it, because they want to keep buying more technology, and technology doesn't solve that problem. So we as world-class CISOs need to recognize, understand, and make sure that we have that integration. To me, the correct answer to that question, when you go in and ask people, what is your role when it comes to cybersecurity? The correct answer is something along the lines of, well, whenever I make decisions or do anything with the business, I need to ask two questions. What is the value and benefit? What is the risk and exposure? And then I need to determine whether the benefit is worth the risk or exposure. Now, yes, the perfect answer is they should call security and they should always make the right decisions. But let's be realistic about it. And I have some CISOs that push back on me on this, and then when we discuss it, they agree. They're like, no, Eric. We don't want anybody in our business making security decisions. We don't want them going in and asking those questions because it's way too dangerous. I'm like, okay, then what's your solution? And their solution is, oh, we need them to call security. If there's any issue, if there's any concern or any decision, they need to call security. And I'm like, okay, how big is your team? And they're like, we have 7 people. And how big is the company? Oh, we have 2,000 people. So you want 2,000 people on a regular basis, because security comes up on a regular basis, on a regular basis to call your team, and you're expecting a team of 7 people to answer every one of those questions. And then it gets real funny, because then they go in and are like, no. They need to send that information to us. And I said, okay, so you're going to have this backlog. And what are they supposed to do? Oh, they're supposed to wait for us to get back to. And at this point, I'm like, really, dude? I mean, do you hear what you're saying? I mean, it just doesn't make any logical sense. Now, yes. I agree that critical, major decisions, major rollouts, major applications, you definitely want to involve security. But you must recognize that there's going to be decisions on a regular basis, and we need to have them thinking correctly about cyber. We need to have them to have the right mindset in the organization. And the mindset is really to do that. What is the value and benefit? What is the risk and exposure? Is the benefit worth the risk and exposure? Now, yes, security should have some guardrails that say these are unacceptable risks. For example, with the clients that we work with, you can never have a system accessible from the internet that's not up to date. So if you have an outdated operating system, or you have a system that's missing patches for more than 30 days, you don't get to make that decision. We've determined that is an unacceptable risk, and we've determined that that server cannot be accessible from the internet. So you are not allowed to make that decision. Guardrail. So if you have a server and you want it accessible from the internet, up to date, fully patched. If it's not, it cannot be accessible from the internet. So those are the types of guardrails that you put in place. Or another one is any system accessible from the internet must never contain critical data or critical information. So you are going to put some guardrails up. Just want to take a quick break. I hope you're enjoying the show. I have this free webinar that I would love for you to check out if you want to become a world-class CISO. But ultimately, you need to make sure that you have everyone in the organization thinking about security correctly. It's about managing risk. We also have to remind ourselves that in any practical sense, 100% security means no functionality. So if we have a system that's 100% perfectly locked down, there is no functionality allowed there. So we need to go in and make sure that we recognize that there's going to be some risks, right? You're going to have some risk in the organization, and we have to allow some risk and exposures. So that's where we need to make sure that we set out the guardrails of what is and is not acceptable risk, right? What can or cannot individuals do? Because once again, from the most granular level, you cannot have individuals that receive emails call you up every time there's an attachment to an email, right? They need to be able to have some tools given to them by cybersecurity so they can go in and decide whether they should or shouldn't open it, or shouldn't click on it, or what actions they should take, right? So we want to make sure everyone in the organization understands the law of security. And the law of security is anytime you add functionality, you decrease security. Anytime you add functionality, you're increasing your overall risk, right? Just like the law of gravity, right? And I have people sometimes going, but Eric, I don't know if I believe or agree with that rule of security, that law of security. Great. You don't have to. You don't have to believe in the law of gravity. But if you step off a 10-story building, you're going to be introduced to it very, very quickly, right? So you can try to ignore the laws that are out there, but you need to recognize that they are there and operating. And with cybersecurity, when you add functionality, you are decreasing security and increasing risk. And we need to recognize and understand that. We need to make sure people in the business recognize that general framework of what their role is in securing the organization. Now, stepping back a little bigger picture, when we look at key questions a CISO should ask is, and this is also tied to the education piece, what business are we really in? And how does the organization make money? And this one, to me, is so obvious on how I do cyber assessments and how I work and how I do CISO services. But it boggles my mind that so many people miss this. Right? So many people don't realize if you don't know what business your organization is really in, how do you know that your security is not getting in the way? Remember, one of the golden rules of cybersecurity is if cybersecurity negatively impacts the business, cybersecurity is wrong. Cybersecurity must be a business enabler. So if you don't understand the business and you don't know the business, how can you make sure you're enabling the business, right? So you got to have a really good, clear picture of that. Also, how do we make money? What is the way that we make money? And once again, tied to that first question is, how do we know we're not hurting the money-making capability of the business if we don't understand, right? Security is not independently done. You can't just go in and say, this is the way it is. You have to look at the business and say, okay, what are the things that we need to focus on to enable the business to be successful and as secure as possible? We want to go in and create customized solutions. And that's, to me, where a lot of CISOs get in trouble. They do this cookie cutter. We had one client we were working with, a brand new CISO. And within the first 6 months, this CISO spent a ton of money and they brought in a bunch of vendors. And it was causing all sorts of havoc and problems, issues, and everyone was frustrated. And I went to the CISO and I said, why did you go in and buy all this technology and bring in all these vendors? And their response was, well, that's what I did at my last 3 companies. And I trust these products and I trust those vendors. I said, okay, is this company different than the previous companies that you worked at? And they look at me like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, it has everything to do with everything, right? And they're like, no, it's a different company, different size, different market. I said, so why are you doing cookie cutter security? Why do you think just because this worked in that business, it's going to work here? Shouldn't we spend some time working together to understand the business? Shouldn't we understand what are the unique challenges within this organization? What differentiates them from the competitors? What data would have the biggest impact to the organization if it got breached? What are the most critical business processes? And that's where things got a little strenuous there, because this is what happens when you're a world-class security engineer and you get the CISO title. You're treating it as a technical problem. And technical problems can be solved in the same way. Business and strategic problems cannot. So they were focusing this solely from a technical standpoint of this technology works in solving these exposures, but they never step back to understand the business. So you want to always go in and look at and understand the business first. Then you want to say, okay, what could have the biggest impact on our business? What could happen that would cause the biggest impact and exposure to our organization? I covered it in a previous podcast, but one of my favorite things I love working with the executives on, and the CISO and others, is for the current organization, what are the 3 incidents that, if they happen, would have the biggest impact to the business? Essentially, it's the what keeps you up at night question. What are the things that you're most worried about? What are the things that you're most concerned about? What are the things that, if they happen, would be devastating to your organization? Essentially, front page of the news type stuff. What are the things that, if they happen to your business and organization, would cause major loss of confidence, reputational damage, and for you to be all over the news? We need to know those answers, and they are sometimes similar, but in many times very unique for different organizations that we're working for. Because it goes back to this. Cybersecurity is 3 things. It's the definition of cybersecurity is understanding, managing, and mitigating the risk of your critical data being disclosed, altered, or denied access. So we need to basically understand risk. Risk is threat times vulnerabilities. So we need to understand what is it that could happen to your organization that would have the highest likelihood that would cause the biggest impact to your critical data, and which of the 3 tenets of disclosure, alteration, or denied access would that manifest itself as. Now, when you're going in and you're asking that simple question of what are the 3 things that, if they happen, would be devastating to our business, you're looking at what is the probability of loss to the organization, and then you're going a level deeper. You're saying, here's the threat, that high likelihood, and here's the vulnerability with the impact to our business, and here's how it's going to happen to our data, and here's the component that caused it. So that simple but very, very powerful question is basically covering all aspects of cybersecurity. It's completely covering that definition of what is cybersecurity and what are we focusing on for our business. And then once we know those 3 core things, then that drives us to now what are the biggest vulnerabilities or exposures in our organization that would allow this to happen? How exposed are we today? And then what is the right course of action that we need to take to start fixing and addressing it. And then based on that, notice how all these puzzle pieces fit together. That based on that, we then go to the executives and say, based on where we are today, and based on the 3 incidents that we identified, the first incident right now today, if we don't do anything and continue the current course we're on, there's a 90% chance that this will happen and will cost us $8 million. Incident 2, the way we are today, there's a 40% chance that this will happen and cost us $3 million. And the third incident has a 60% chance and will cost us $4 million. Based on that, we believe we should focus in on the first. So if we don't do anything else, there's over a 90% chance we're going to lose millions of dollars. Here's the plan that I put together, and I would like to spend $600K on reducing that 90% to 30%. Is that something you would like us to do, or do you want us to continue with the current exposures that are out there today? So all the things we've been talking about in our podcast and all the things I cover in my CISO certification, all of them fit very nicely together. And now what you're doing is a couple of very important things. You're giving the executives an accurate assessment of the organization. When I talk to a lot of CEOs, I get 3 major complaints from them. The first major complaint I get is they don't speak English. The CISO doesn't speak English. I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, they come to us with these 50-page slides that are super technical, all this jumbo jargon that we don't care about, false positives, IPS, IDS, and all this stuff. And that's what we want to know. And they're not giving us what we want or speaking in a language that we understand. The second is security people are very passionate, but they tend to get emotional, and they already decide what the right course of action is, and they're coming in and telling us what must be done. We want to understand the options. We want to understand the process. We want to understand what happens if we do or don't do this. We don't want somebody to decide for us and force an answer on us very emotionally without any data or information. And then the third one is they don't know how to prioritize with the business, and they would just keep spending money, spending money, spending money. Now notice, if you go to the executives with that single chart, here's what could happen, the likelihood of it happening and the cost of it happens. So that's option 1. If we don't do anything, this is the current snapshot. My suggestion is door number 2 is to spend X amount of money to reduce that to a certain level. So I'm giving them both options. Here's what you have today, and here's how we can minimize it. We're speaking in business language that they understand and know. And then here's the trick. Always present more than what you're asking for. So if I'm going to ask for 3 items, I'm going to present 10. Because now it shows that last one that we're prioritizing. That we're prioritizing and understanding the business. And even though there's 10 risks out there, right now today we should only cover the first 3. So remember, world-class CISOs understand and know the business. They recognize the golden rule that cybersecurity is a business enabler. And they also go in and ask questions and give all the options of what's happening and what's occurring within the business. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Life of a CISO and can't wait to see you on the next episode.